happy Friday. I know I normally upload on Saturdays, but I have a super special, very time-sensitive thing that I had to tell you about immediately, and this is going to be a really awesome opportunity to get a behind-the-scenes look at one of my favorite clarinet programs on the whole internet, and get you some behind-the-scenes information that actually is going to make a difference and help in your clarinet journey right now. So what am I talking about? This is Michelle Anderson's from Clarinet Mentors, her online clarinet transformation community. I've been working with Michelle for several years now, and a big part of the transformation community for the past 2 years. This is a wonderful, wonderful program where we have this great community of other clarinetists, and we get together and have weekly master classes with everybody. We have guided practice sessions that we go through, and we have some special deep dives and focus pieces and all kinds of fun other stuff. And the whole goal of this community is for people to transform their clarinet playing, move to the next level of their clarinet playing. And one of my very favorite things about this is the community aspect of it. There's people in there who've been with Michelle for years and years and years, and people who've been in the transformation community for the past 2 years, and we really get to know each other and we get to see the progress of everybody's playing, and it's just so inspirational and such a wonderful, lovely community where everybody's so supportive, and it just really means a lot to me that I get to be a part of this community. And I think anybody would be lucky to have the interactions and get to know the wonderful people in there. Not to mention, you also get regular master classes and mini lessons with Michelle Anderson and myself, and also Debbie Andrus, who's a fantastic teacher. We did, between the three mentors in the group, we did a little mini session together once, and she actually made some really transformational and helpful things for myself. So all three of us are wonderful teachers, and it's a great opportunity to work with us and to get to know the community. So the reason why I'm telling you about this is, one, this last week I did a session that was one of our deep dive sessions on a specific piece, and it was also sharing and going really deep with my $1 million practice process. And after that session, I was like, people were really liking it. It was super helpful. I think it was some of my absolute best stuff to help with people. So I sent Michelle a message and was like, I gotta share this with more people. Like, this is such an incredible training. I want as many people as possible to see it. So that's what this video is we're going to be seeing that whole training. And the other super important time-sensitive part of it is that tomorrow, on January 14th, 2023, Michelle is going to be showing some other behind-the-scenes components live. So she's going to be doing a live masterclass tomorrow. She's going to be doing a live guided practice, and then another live master class as well. And there's a link in the description to register for those live events so you can get on Zoom and feel what it feels like to be a part of the transformation community. And there's spots to actually work in a mini lesson with Michelle. So you're going to want to go to the link in the description. I'll also put it in the pinned comment. Like, click that link, get registered for those trainings that are starting tomorrow, so that you can get that. And honestly, even if you want to click off of this video right now and go get registered for those, go for it. That's going to be really cool to get that behind the scenes. Plus, you're also going to get tons of valuable advice from Michelle's teaching and sort of seeing Michelle's practicing and all of her practice tips on how to do it. So it's going to be awesome. 3 live events, really, really worth checking out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into that absolutely dynamite session I did on the deep dive of Rose number 1, going over that $1 million practice process. Even the stuff in this presentation alone could completely change the trajectory of your 2023 and your clarinet journey for this year. Seriously, some of my best stuff, so I hope you enjoy it. Hello!
Hello! Hi.
Excellent. So this is going to be a really fun little series of classes, I think. We're going really deep on Rose 1, but it's not like the deep dives that we've done in the past, where we sort of are focused on just playing it. I'm more thinking of this as a way to use that piece to like really solidify our practice process and make our practicing as efficient and effective and rewarding as possible. So I have some slides. Let me pull those up real quick, and then we'll get started. So with this, like I said, the idea it is a deep dive on Rose 32 #1, but it's more about using this classic piece to like really master the process. So let's unpack that a little bit more and talk about what we're trying to get out of this. Because if we're all on the same page for the goal of what we want to get out of this, then hopefully we'll be able to get it. So we want to gain a better understanding of how to really, really learn this piece deeply. And then we'll take that on to be able to learn any piece deeply. And then get long-term progress in our playing. We've probably almost all have played the Rose 32 #1 before, but this is where we're going to take it to that next level and actually improve our clarinet playing by learning the piece. And I think I just want to add too, I think this is probably the #1 thing that's holding us back. Many people in the community, and even me at times too. And I think this is when I sort of started figuring this out, was when my playing like really took off. I think this is just sort of in my own teaching for lots of people in the community. We're sort of at the similar level that I was at in high school, where like you're good players and you sort of know what you're doing, but you haven't quite unlocked that next level, which is what I got when I started studying with Dr. Reynolds, and also started going to college and practicing like 2 to 4 hours every day during the week. That obviously made a big difference for it. But it's sort of that lower part of the growth curve where things like really start to take off, and we go to like very much the next level of playing. And we've been here in the community. Lots of you have been working with Michelle for many years. Lots of you have been in this community since it started. I think 2 years ago now was when the transformation community officially started. So I think we're ready. Like we have the foundation, and now we're ready to take off and go to the next level. So that's kind of what this is all about. So this deep learning is really important because that's where the true progress comes from. I think a lot of us just work at that surface level where we sort of learn the notes and rhythms, and that flexes muscles that we're already good at. All of us, like I was saying, we have that foundation where we're pretty good at learning the notes and rhythms. So many of you have performed many times in master classes, really great. And you've had that practice of preparing a piece for the master class of the month and going out there and playing it and getting feedback. And it's great. We're really good at that surface level of just getting the pieces done. But I want to go to that deeper level to sort of create new muscles. I know this isn't a perfect analogy because that's not really how like building muscle works. We can't just, oh, I have a third bicep now. That'd be interesting. But work with the analogy a little bit for me. We want to build new muscles and do new things because that's what actually creates progress and growth. You can learn a piece or learn many pieces in a similar way for years and years and years, and your clarinet playing doesn't actually improve that much, or your musicianship doesn't really improve that much. But when you start looking at a piece and think, oh, how can I do the clarinet playing a little bit better here? Or how can I add a little more phrasing here, and start working at that next level and pushing our comfort zone? That's where growth happens, right? Another way to put that is practice doesn't actually make perfect. I know we've all heard the phrase practice makes perfect. And yeah, practicing is good and practicing is necessary, but practice doesn't inherently make perfect. You have to work to get the results, but you can work in the wrong way. For example, let's use anchor tonguing as an example. I know many people have struggled with anchor tonguing and had to relearn it. And you could anchor tongue for years and years and years. And every time you anchor tongue, you're getting better at anchor tonguing. But that's actually moving you in the wrong direction from where we want to be. So just doing the work can sometimes get you the wrong results. And it also can just get you the same results. Like I was saying, just learning a piece to perform, learning the notes and rhythms. So the much better phrase, in my opinion, is practice makes permanent. There's also another adaptation of this that's perfect practice makes perfect, which I think is good. Also, it's definitely the right idea, but having to practice perfectly is very stressful to me. I like the practice makes permanent better. So I can just remember like every time I'm practicing to try to be doing it exactly the way that I want and just know that whatever I'm practicing is getting ingrained and encoded into permanence. So I want to make sure it's good, of course. So how do we actually make sure that our practice is productive and meaningful? That's sort of the question that we're trying to tackle here. That's the $1 million question, if you will. And I have a $1 million solution. I'm just calling this the $1 million practice process. I think a lot of us are relatively familiar with this practice process, but I really wanted to flesh it out and give it a fancy name so you pay attention to it because it's really is worth $1 million. So the first step is to figure out how the music goes, and we'll go deeper into each of these over the course of this. But definitely as you're hearing these things, if any questions are popping into your head or any thoughts, feel free to keep track of them in the chat, and we'll definitely go over any questions and work through this. But the first step is, how does the music go? This can be like listening to recordings, audiation, etc. The second step is to actually try it on the instrument and see what comes out. And inevitably, you'll notice that what comes out of the instrument isn't exactly how the music should go. There's some potential issues that can come up here. One is, I think most of us don't figure out how the music goes well enough. So we try it on the instrument first. We sort of skip step one. We try it on the instrument and work with whatever comes out of the instrument, which is fine. And again, we'll get you results, but we're trying to do different things here. Think of Heidi's thing, the do different, get different approach, right? So if we go deeper with learning how the music goes, then it's going to be easier to make the instrument do it. And it's going to be more clear where the discrepancy is between what's actually coming out of the instrument and how we actually want it to come out. A really good example that's really tangible for everybody is, how many times have you learned a piece with the wrong accidental somewhere? Maybe you didn't apply the key signature in one measure, or didn't catch that an accidental was carrying through the measure, and you learn it wrong and it sounds fine. And then when you put in the actual right accidental, it sounds weird and wrong, right? I think we've all experienced that before. And if you use this process, then that's less likely to happen. And it makes it where you're not just taking whatever the instrument gives you and working with it, but you actually know what you want. So comparing those and seeing how it goes, making sure you have a good idea of step one, make sure that you're really honest and paying attention to what's coming out at step two, so you can compare those. Then you just practice it. This is the thing we're all good at, but having the actual step one to compare it to makes it a lot more effective. And then the last step is to practice performing it, making sure that you can actually do it consistently and do it confidently in a performance. So let's unpack these a little bit more. And yeah, it's just a little disclaimer to always work in small chunks. Don't feel like you need to know exactly how the whole piece goes. You don't have to audiate a whole 15-minute sonata or concerto before you can even start playing any of it. Just do like 8 measures at a time, or one phrase at a time is always a good way to go about it. So step one, how does the music go? The easiest way to get this is to just listen to recordings, especially if there's good recordings available. That's a great source for how the music actually goes. We have to remember that music isn't the ink on the page. Music is the sound that we hear. So making sure that you're actually listening and hearing how the music goes. Now, there isn't always a good recording available, or sometimes any recording available. So then you have to do a little bit of work to figure it out. And even if there is a recording available, I still think audiating is a really good practice to get into. So I know I've talked about audiation many times in different classes and master classes. But I'll give a quick synopsis of it here. Audiating is basically the same as visualizing, but for audio rather than visuals. So it's the process of looking at a sheet of music and then sort of hearing how it goes in your head. And audiating, I think, is a skill that all of us are quite underdeveloped on. I think maybe Bob is one potential exception to that. He's so good at like playing things by ear and hearing how music goes. I think his audiation is very strong. But I think that's kind of just a coincidence. Like, I don't think he's done tons of work specifically trying to get better at audiating. I think that's just how he learns music. So I think even for him, like more focus on actually practicing audiation would be very powerful. This is one of the big things that I'm working on improving this year is my audiation skills and being able to like hear pitches a little better, not in a perfect pitch way, but just like really know the music. Because when you can look at a piece of music and hear it really clearly in your head with the right rhythm, close to the right notes, the phrasing, the character, all of that stuff that you want, that's when you can really have a clear target of what you're aiming for. And that's what this step one is all about, is really knowing how the music goes so that you have that good target that you're aiming for. I've used this analogy before too, but if you're throwing darts, it's so much easier to hit the bullseye with darts if you're not blindfolded and you can actually see the target. I think so often in music, like I was saying, we pull out the clarinet and start throwing the darts or just playing the clarinet, but we don't even know what the target we're aiming for is. So this first step of figuring out how the music goes, I think cannot be overstated. I think it's one of those things that is a little bit foreign and definitely unfamiliar to most of us. So it's something that's so easy to skip over, but I really encourage you to go deep with this, and we'll be doing that in the homework from this session too. So that's the first step. How does the music go? Second step, try it on the instrument. This one's a little more simple. So we now have the target. Theoretically, if we're really doing this process, we have the target, we can hear in our head exactly how we want the music to go. Then we try to get the instrument to do it. And this is kind of the whole reason why we do fundamentals, your long tones, your technique, your articulation. That's all to get better control of the instrument so that you can guide it towards the target that you want. I like to think there's like the clarinet and the music, and they're a little bit different. Yes, at the end of the day, we want them to come together and make music come out of our clarinet. But they're separate in that the music wants to go one way. Step one, how does the music go? The instrument has some other tendencies that it wants to do. And honestly, the instrument's never going to play itself. You can't just sit there and be like, okay, clarinet, here's the music now do it. And even from our end of playing it, maybe we can wiggle our fingers to the right spot and get the reed vibrating, but the instrument's still going to have its quirks of like crossing the break, or different registers sound different, or different notes have different tuning tendencies than other notes, or some notes are harder to articulate on. So we have to always be adjusting and sort of getting the clarinet to do the music, which is what step three is all about. Is you try it on the instrument, and depending on the level of your fundamentals, maybe it comes really close. That's why in some of the guided practices and things, and I'm sort of just like sight reading some of the finger fitness etudes and stuff like that. I'm familiar enough with music that I can sort of see how the music's going in real time. And I've done enough warm-ups and fundamentals on the instrument that I can more or less make the clarinet do what the music wants in real time. But this process of comparing is super duper important. And it's actually pretty easy too. If you're really clear about how the music goes in that step one, then it's very clear if what's coming out of the instrument is matching that or not. So we just need to identify what wasn't right. Were there rhythm issues on the instrument? Were there note issues? Were there sound quality issues, etc.? And getting it to match that audiation as much as possible. Let me see. Yes, recording yourself is also a great tool at this step in the process, because it's hard to play the clarinet and keep track of everything that's going on coming out of the instrument at the same time. Like, it takes bandwidth and brain power to put the fingers in the right spot and keep the reed vibrating and have the air and the embouchure and the voicing. So sometimes it's hard to have extra bandwidth to actually listen to what's coming out. So recording yourself can be a great step in this process. Record yourself, compare it to the professional recordings and see where the difference is. Record yourself and compare it to your audiation and see where it is. Then we practice. And like I said before, this is the part that we're all good at. This is the part that we all focus on a lot, I think. We know all the practice techniques. This is where the practice techniques come in, right? Using your identifying, isolating, improving, integrating, practice rhythms, going slower, note groupings, playing like backwards or working in small chunks backwards. All of those techniques are really useful to help. Say you're playing something fast and in the audiation, you want to hear really clean or whatever the music is. And when you're playing it, either in real time, you're noticing it's not very even or not keeping up very well, or when you record it or when you record it and slow it down, then it's really obvious that there's issues there. That's where we pull out the practice techniques. Do some note groupings, do some practice rhythms, do whatever you need to do to get what's coming out of the instrument closer to how the music actually goes. And like I said, I think most of us are quite good at this part of practicing because this is the part that gets talked about a lot in the master classes. We'll always say like, oh, try this technique here or do this with it. And this is pretty tangible, I think. Knowing how the music goes is pretty intangible and hard to know if you know how the music goes or not. Doing practice techniques is pretty straightforward. The one problem with this, though, that can be that sort of flexing the same muscle over and over is that, yes, we know to do our practice rhythms, and there may be some of you who like do practice rhythms like religiously. Every time you see a run, you're like dotted rhythms, short, long, long, short. You're doing all the practice rhythms, but you're lacking the purpose behind it. You aren't doing the practice rhythms because you know that you're playing it uneven or you're skipping some notes and you're trying to get it closer to how the music goes. You're sort of doing it just because me or Michelle or Debbie or somebody's told you to do them, or you saw Carlos do it in a guided practice or something like that. You're just doing it because it's a practice technique you know about, but you don't actually have the purpose behind it of, I need to make my notes more even, or I have this idea of hearing these fast notes really clean, really clear, really even, but I'm not hearing that when I actually try to get it out of the instrument, which is why this is the fourth step of the process and not earlier up in the process, because it's so much more important to have that foundation of how the music goes and what's actually coming out of the instrument before we just throw practice techniques at it sort of mindlessly. It's the same thing as doing your long tones. As I do my long tones every day, but you're not actually thinking about the sound quality and thinking about the sound you want and listening to the sound you're getting and trying to get that to match. I think this is my whole goal for this, the whole initial purpose of like what's going to take all of us to that next level is more clarity on how we want it to go and more honesty with where we are, and then just improving that little bit every single time we practice. And then the last step is to practice performing it. This is an interesting one that's, I feel like, a little bit outside of the process. Like the first 4 steps are all sort of like the feedback loop you get into. You know the piece, then you try it on the instrument, then you compare, and then you fix. And you sort of are constantly going in that loop of like, was the rhythm exactly how I wanted? Okay, no, it wasn't. So now I'm going to fix that. And then now we're the notes. No, I'm going to fix that. And you sort of get that feedback loop going in the first 4 steps. And it can be on anything. And maybe you're like, oh, I played it really well. Even listening to the recording, it's like everything's coming out the way that I want. So maybe I need to take how I want the music to go to the next level. Maybe I need to analyze the music a little bit more and look for reasons behind the phrasing, and what should I do with the phrasing, and why should I do that with the phrasing. And then you've raised the level of how you want the music to go. Now you need to raise the level of the clarinet playing to match it. Then we have step 5 of practicing performing it, which is where we make sure it all comes together and we can actually execute it consistently and confidently. And I actually really encourage doing this even in the small chunks. I mentioned working sort of 8 measures at a time. I think we should always, before we go on to the next 8 measures, is we should do a run through of the small chunk in performance mode, thinking, okay, this is the performance. I'm going to start, I'm going to go straight through it. No matter what happens, you don't stop through the small chunk. Make sure that you can really get it. One of my favorite quotes sort of related to this, and I can never find who it's attributed to, and I don't know if this is exactly it, but it goes something like this, that amateurs do it until they get it right, and professionals do it until they'll never get it wrong. And I think that's kind of what this performance aspect of it is about, is it's not just, okay, I improved it, and like what's coming out of the clarinet's pretty close to actually how I want the music to go and what the music wants, and I can like more or less do it. When you have that mindset to it, that's when you're gonna make mistakes in the performance. And that's, again, there's this like perfect ceiling that we can never reach. But a lot of us are just sort of going through with that mindset. And that's why we can feel like we can never do a whole run through of a piece with no mistakes. I don't know if it's possible for anybody to do a whole run through of a piece with every detail going exactly the way they wanted. And that's kind of the fun of performing and the excitement of performing, but we can get a lot closer to that if we're really practicing performing more often and practicing that focus of performing. I call this sort of the 3 C's of performance. It actually is a whole lot more than just 3 C's, but there's 3 sort of main ones. 1 is making sure that it's correct. 2 is then making sure that it's consistent or comfortable or confident. And that's sort of 3 too, is just that it's really confident and comfortable to it. So it's like, it has to be correct. You have to be able to do it correct consistently, and you have to feel good and confident that you're going to be able to do it correct consistently. And I think all of them, besides correct, like correct is either like you're getting what you want or you're not. All the other ones are a little bit interchangeable and synonymous. If you're comfortable, then it's probably going to be consistent. If you're confident, then you're probably going to be comfortable, etc. So they all sort of lump together, but that's the main thing, is it has to be correct. You have to be able to do it consistently, and it has to be confident, comfortable. At one time I had like several other C words that were related to that, but I can't think of any of them now, but I think you get the idea. So that's the $1 million practice process. Like that's what we should all be doing. And that's what I want to sort of guide us all through on rose number 1. Because again, it's a piece we've done before, but we're going to do it differently and hopefully get a whole lot more out of it. Another way to look at it, this is my like practice framework that I did a video on. That's very similar to this process. This practice framework is based off of the success formula that I got from Dean Graziosi, which is clarity, have clear on the goal, know exactly what you want, honesty with where you are, and then that illuminates the path forward. I think that's, for any of us who feel like we're stagnant, it's either because we don't know what we want, we aren't super clear with what success looks like or where we want to go, and or we're not being honest with where we are. I think I'll just go on a brief tangent about this that I think is relevant. This is a big difference, or maybe the biggest difference that I find between adult learners and kid learners. The adult students, I think, have really good clarity on what they want. They think, oh, I want my sound to sound really good and do this. And they know, they've listened to music. And I think a lot of you can relate that part of the reason you play clarinet is because you've heard great clarinet playing and you want to do that, right? But I think where adults fall short is the honesty with where they are, where sometimes they think like, oh yeah, like my teacher says to do this with my tongue or my fingers or my air. And yeah, like, of course I'm doing that. I've heard that before. Like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to do it. But they're not actually honest with themselves to like really see if they're doing it or check it, like really reflect if it's actually happening. The other part of it too is maybe they are honest with themselves, but they have all kinds of like limiting beliefs of like, oh yeah, of course I know my air needs to be better, but like, oh, I don't have good lungs. I don't work out enough to have good lungs, or yeah, I know my fingers are supposed to be faster, but I'm just like old and can't move my fingers fast. I don't know, things like that. And some of those things are very, very valid. If you have like a collapsed lung and only have half your lung function, then yeah, of course, air is going to be harder for you. It's super valid. I don't think anybody here has that. I hope not. But you still can sort of be honest with yourself and know where you need to go. And I think a lot of us think that we need to be able to move our fingers a lot faster than you actually really need to play the clarinet, or that you need a lot more lung capacity than you actually need to. But really, if you just figured out how to use your air efficiently and get the most reed vibrations out of your air, then you could do it. So that's sort of adult learners. Student learners, like kids, are the opposite of that, where they don't have as many limiting beliefs built up. They're relatively good and honest with themselves about what they're doing, but they don't have like good clarity on their goal. Young students, I feel like, haven't heard that much clarinet playing and don't know how great the clarinet can sound. So they're sort of like, well, I'm doing what my teacher is saying and like sounds coming out of my instrument, but they aren't ever like aiming for better sound. And that's just a big generalization. Everybody could be different. There could be young kids who like really know what they want and aren't as honest with themselves, or adults who are really honest with themselves but don't know what they want. It's all can be anything, but this is the secret to success for playing the clarinet. And you can see how this relates to the $1 million practice process, right? So we have step one is figuring out the goal. How does the music go? I made this practice framework before I had the word audiating. So you can see like visualizing, audiation, kind of interchangeable there. Step two is like what's coming out of the instrument. That's where you get honest with yourself, or like where you really are. Step three is comparing them. I love using the 4 opportunities for improvement to compare the two. Sometimes it's overwhelming to be like, well, I know what I want it to sound like, and I know what I sound like, but I'm not actually sure what the difference is. I know I don't sound the way that I want. I'm honest with myself that it's not coming out the way that I want, but I'm not actually sure what it is. That's where you can dig into the 4 opportunities for improvement and look at like, what's different about the rhythm? Where are there any rhythm mistakes or opportunities? Sound quality, notes, style. It gives you a little narrower focus, so it's not so overwhelmingly just like, well, I don't sound like the recording, so I guess it's bad. This allows you to start targeting some specific things. And then step 4 is actually when you start practicing and getting into it. So now that you've identified that there's a rhythm problem here, you can isolate and improve it, and then integrate it and make sure it all goes together. And then those 3 C's, that was another one. In control is another one that's kind of interchangeable with comfortable and confident. And that's step 5, where we practice the performing. So that's the main thing, but there's some pitfalls, right? I think going through this, this probably doesn't feel so crazy new to you. I think I've talked about this process many times, especially those of you who take lessons with me. Like, this is what we're doing all the time, right? Figure out how the music goes, figure out what's coming out of the clarinet, and work on improving it. But even though it's simple, we aren't always doing it. And this is like, as I get older and get more experience in my life, I'm really realizing that like the secrets to all success are the simple things. I heard this one. It was somebody on Facebook posted it, who's a clarinet teacher. He posted something to this effect. I teach fundamental skills because there's no such thing as advanced skills, only advanced situations that require strong fundamentals. And I think that was like, I agree with that so much. And it was like enlightening to hear it put that way, because that's like 100% my teaching philosophy as well. Like, there's no advanced skills. Yeah, like double tonguing, circular breathing, sure. But those are just kind of like advanced gimmicks that are kind of fun to play with. The skills that you need to play like Martin Frost, is good sound quality, good rhythm, good finger technique, good understanding of the music, like fundamental stuff. And that's the goal of this deep dive on the Rose, is like going really, really deep on the fundamentals in this music that we're really familiar with. And it just comes down to doing the simple things. Stop searching for like some fancy trick you can do to make things work better. Just go deeper on the simple things. So some ways that, or some areas that we need to go deeper: better audiation. Like I mentioned, I think all of us need to get better at audiation, myself like 10,000% included. Getting a better idea of how the music goes. Then getting pickier about your playing. I don't need to go deeper on that. I'm very picky about my playing, and sometimes obnoxiously so. But that's like sort of that honesty side of it, of like really what is actually coming out of the instrument. More creative practice strategies. Maybe you practice this fast music for like years, maybe at this point, and you've you know how you want it to go, you know where you're lacking, but you haven't been creative enough in like, well, maybe this dotted rhythm would help, or doing these groupings, or actually going slower. Sometimes it's not even creativity again, it's just like actually doing the fundamentals of really getting it slower. Another big pitfall is we think it'll take too long. When we get a piece of music, especially this is true when we have a limited amount of time, like it's concert band music and you get it a week before the first rehearsal and you're like, oh, I don't have time to like really figure this out. I just need to like get it under my fingers so I can hang on and not fall apart at the rehearsal. But that's not the case. It actually takes less time to really get it, because you end up getting it a lot more. It's maybe a little bit more time up front, but the payoff is exponential. When you just sort of go at it, trying to learn it over and over, there is probably some like linear growth where like you learn the notes a little bit better, it gets a little bit better. But when you really do this process of like, it's a little slow figuring out how the music goes, seeing what comes out of the instrument. But once you like really know how the music goes, and especially if you've practiced your fundamentals and have that good playing, then it's like a rocket exponential. It goes really fast. And this is kind of the secret to sight reading well too, is this just lots of familiarity with figuring out how the music goes and having control over the instrument. I want to go off on one brief tangent here too. This is just like a quick little bonus tip here that I wasn't planning, but something I said made me think of it. So many of us pull up a piece of music and like the first thing we do is figure out if we like know the notes. I think we can all relate to that, where you like get your new piece that you're going to be working on and you just sort of read through it first, like seeing like, oh, where are the notes going? And I have done this many times in the past too. And I just recently realized that's like the dumbest thing you could do because you already know the notes. There aren't going to be any notes in the piece that you've never played before. And maybe when we're very first learning, we do need to do that. And I think I was taught in the Essential Elements book. This is just coming to me now, because I didn't think about this before, but I was taught in the Essential Elements book. And the way that that book works is you're working through small pieces of music and it sort of introduces new notes as you go. So yeah, there was a time when I didn't know what a B flat was. And there was a piece and it would say, the new note in this piece is B flat. Look at where the B flat is in this piece. This is how you finger it. Now do it. So yeah, maybe there was a time and maybe that's how we first learned. But if you can play your chromatic scale, you know all the notes. So you don't need to go through the piece and figure out the notes. And you may say, well, I'm figuring out what order the notes are in for this piece and how it goes. And yeah, there's like a little benefit to that. But if you aren't doing it with the right rhythm, you aren't learning the piece. You're just reading notes. And like I said, if you can play your chromatic scale, you know how to read notes. So it's kind of a waste of time to do that. Instead, you can be actually thinking about the rhythm, thinking about the patterns of notes, where you can see like, oh, this is 4/16 notes on beat 4 of chromatic scale going to G, da ba da ba dee. Then you know what it is because you already know those notes. You don't have to read, let's see, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, then G. Like you already know how to do that. So you don't need to waste your time like going through without the rhythm. You should just start with how does the music go every time, I think. And again, if you're more of a beginner and there are lots of notes that you're seeing that you've never played before, then maybe you do have to figure out the notes. But I think most of us, like if you know your chromatic scale, you know how to read the notes, right? And then the last pitfall, tangent over the next pitfall, is that it's just a new skill. Like we're not used to learning things in this way. So it's a little unfamiliar, and everything that's unfamiliar is a little bit confusing and a little tricky, and we have to figure it out. So it's just a matter of practicing and building those new muscles. So let's actually give it a try looking through rows number 1. But actually, before we do that, does anybody have any questions about anything that I said? Put them in the chat, raise your hand. I think Steve has something, yeah?
What you said is really true, but it's not just knowing the notes, but the order of the notes. And we don't play every note as much as other notes. So for example, you're going along and suddenly the music modulates to D flat. It's like, oh, shoot. And you're going to have to think. So it's not either or. There are those gray areas where, yeah, you just have to go over and over till your fingers get used, or just do the scale till your fingers know what's expected of them. It's not just, you know the notes or you don't know the notes.
Yep. That's totally true. I don't think I was super clear about what I was talking about. That's a waste of time too, is just going through like without the rhythm. I think that's what a lot of us do, is we just sort of play through, and you're totally right. We do need to figure out this unique order for the piece. That is very much a part of it. For the example with D flat, this is 100% hypocritical because I also have that same feeling when I see D flat, but we should probably just practice our D flat scales better so we don't have that so much, but easier said than done for sure. But yeah, it's okay. You do have to learn this particular order of the notes, but just do it with the rhythm, and then you're learning the music at the same time. And it's so much more efficient and effective than doing that first run through without rhythm just to see where the fingers are.
Yeah, that I agree with. I mean, that's kind of silly.
Yeah, right.
Without the rhythm.
Right. So many of my students do that. You like get a new piece and they sort of like try to play through all the notes just to sort of get a feel for it. And it's just like a big waste. Yeah. Teresa, did you have something? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was just to say the audiation bit and then listening to it. I'm guessing that kind of goes in, well, it would for me. I think it would kind of go in cycles. It's very, I haven't been to one of these for a while, but it's very particular because I did a recording on this a few months back, and I had never listened to the etudes at all, and I just played it. So for me, I think, yeah, listening to recordings is really helpful. And I guess to begin with, it's really good. But I think if you're trying to figure out how to interpret it, which I'm guessing comes later, and how you might nuance that, then the audiation and the listening thing for me, there's always still like a caution there. It's useful to get a sense of like how it goes and how other people interpret it. But the interpretation is like another layer. So I'm imagining this kind of goes in, you're seeing it going in steps and stages.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's a really good point. There is a difference between listening to a recording and actually audiating it for yourself, and then actually playing it on the instrument. Where when you listen to a recording, it's great to get a general feel of it. And you could go like really deep with just the recording part of it too, and like really analyze like, okay, in the recording they're crescendoing here, and like this note has a little accent on it, and you could go really deep in like exactly recreating the recording as your interpretation. I think that's kind of boring, and like most of us don't want to just play exactly like the recording. So that's where the audiation comes in, of actually figuring it out for yourself. So the recording is going to sort of bring the music from visuals on the page to actually hearing it as sound and start to give you an idea of how the music goes. And then you can go back in with sort of your own analysis and your own audiation to think like, I want to do a crescendo there and do this little accent because like that's feels how the music goes to me. And that's something that you can really only get in your own audiation. You can start with a recording and then sort of refine it from there. But yeah, that's a good point. And I think as far as going in stages, yes, I think it can all be sort of in that feedback loop where maybe the first time you're learning a piece, you listen to the recording and you work in small chunks. Always do this in small chunks or you don't go crazy. You do that first phrase and you play the first phrase sort of how the recording goes. And once you've practiced it enough where you can get it to how you think the recording goes, then you might ask yourself, okay, like I'm doing this now, but maybe there's more to it. Maybe I can refine the audiation a little bit deeper and analyze the music a little bit deeper and find some nuanced phrasing things that might be interesting for me to bring out. And then you get the clarinet to do that again. So yeah, it does sort of has that looping effect to it.
I think for me, I don't know about anyone else, but I think probably I need to practice my audiation skills. I only came across this recently, actually. I think it was in one of Noah, what's his name's Bulletproof Jobbies messages or something. Maybe it's been around before that, but I saw it on there. But I think listening just really helps kickstart that for me. Just listening to someone, it doesn't even really matter how they're interpreting it. It just gives you an overall flavour of the piece. I mean, okay, you pick up their interpretation as well, but I mean, it's really just like, how does it sound? And that, like, for me, having that as a baseline helps me to just do that audiation quicker. Like I don't, in the early stages, I don't necessarily really care how someone else is interpreting it. Maybe it just speeds that up, but maybe that's just my brain and I'm a bit weird.
No, that's totally yes. And it's not just you. I think 100% of everybody needs to get better at audiating. Again, like myself, very much included, because it's just a skill that we don't work on that much. And yes, starting with the recording is a great idea. That's why I had that as like the first thing for how the music goes, is just listen to a recording. That's going to like speed up the process so much. When it's like a new piece and there is no recording of it, it takes a lot of effort to like do the score studying and like figure out how it actually is supposed to sound. And that's what good conductors do, is they like really figure out how the music is supposed to go. But yeah, listening to a recording speeds that up so much and makes it so much easier to get a jump start on that. And then as your audiation skills develop, maybe there will be a day where you can look at a piece and pretty much hear a recording pretty quick in your head. Again, I think the best conductors are towards that, especially any like great conductors also with perfect pitch. I think probably their audiation, like they can almost make a recording in their head in real time. But I'm definitely nowhere close to that. And I think most of us aren't. And the recording helps to jumpstart that. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Great. If you think of anything, feel free to put it in the chat. But let's actually do it. So what I want to go through is sort of the homework from this session. And again, this is, you're probably feeling one of two ways at this point, of either, oh, this is really interesting, and like I've never really gone at a piece like this, and I think it's worth trying, in which case hopefully you'll give it a try. Or maybe you're a little bit like, well, yeah, like I've heard this stuff before, like this is how we should learn pieces. It definitely makes sense. Like, I think I do this. If you're in that sort of second camp, I want you to like really reflect of like, are you really, really doing it? And even if you do think you already do this, or you know this stuff already, or this sounds really familiar, how can you do more of it, or again, go deeper with it? Because that's where growth happens, is when we go deeper, right? So I want all of us to give this a try and really go seriously with this, just to see what happens. Worst case scenario is you learn how to play the Rose Etude really good. So the first thing for our homework is I want us to listen to some recordings and actually follow along with the music. I think that's another thing that we sometimes skip over, is we'll listen to a recording of the piece, but we sort of listen to it in the background, or just sort of give it a listen through just to sort of see what kind of piece it is. I want us to listen to a few recordings so that we're like really getting it in our ear and actually looking at the music. So we're building that connection between the visuals and the sound. So listen to at least 3 different recordings while actually looking at the music. And you don't have to look at the music every time. And you also may want to listen more than just 3 times. But at least some of the times, like really building that connection between the visuals and the auditory of what you're hearing. Next step, understand and be able to count all of the rhythms with a metronome. This is again, my standard rhythm spiel, you don't have to actually like count through the whole piece. But if there's any measure that you have any doubt at all for how the rhythm works, I want you to count it out, write in any counting that you need, and make sure that you can do it with the metronome. The thing that I say to my students, and will say to all of you, is if you can't look at a measure, put the metronome on and count it, then you need to be practicing doing that. If you're more experienced with counting and rhythm, then let me actually pull up the music real quick to make this a little more tangible. So if you're familiar with rhythm, or even if you're only slightly familiar with rhythm, you probably don't have to practice counting measure 2, right? You don't have to 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Like, it's a very easy rhythm. Measure 3 is maybe even easier. You don't have to actually explicitly count those, but I think you're all going to probably want to count this measure and this measure too, to like actually figure out how the rhythm goes. Because if you can't just put the metronome on, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 1. If you can't do that, then you need to practice it. Hopefully that's clear. I'll pull up the homework again. Next, analyze the notes a bit and come up with as many patterns in your own words as possible. If you followed along with the music theory sessions, we looked at this Rose 1 quite a few times in that context of music theory and analysis on it. So you can go pretty in depth with this, but in your own words is all that matters, and coming up with as many different ways to look at it as possible. And then the final step is audiating it. So let me actually pull up the music again and elaborate a little bit. So when it comes to the note patterns, I can look at measure 4 and with some analysis, this is something that like, I'll actually explain this. So sight reading this, I probably would see a scale and then like leading tones, half step up, half step up, half step up. Like that's probably what I would see on a first sight read of it. At the like highest level, deepest analysis, this is a C major arpeggio, C, G, E, C, with scale passing tones here and lower neighbor leading tones here. And then this is actually like a scale, a little bit of a appoggiatura leading to G. That's like the super fancy music theory jargon version. If for you, it's, oh, this sharp goes up, this sharp goes up. Hey, there's not a sharp here, but it still goes up by a half step. That's great. Whatever patterns are working for you. Maybe you notice the C, G, E, C, like the arpeggio of it. Maybe you don't, that's fine. But those kinds of patterns, just trying to find, okay, this is an arpeggio, and then we go up by step. And then this is sort of a scale, step, 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 and then a leap down to a step, and then a leap down, then a leap up. Just noticing some of those patterns. And again, work in small chunks for this, so that you're not trying to find the patterns in the whole piece, because that's going to be really tiring and overwhelming. Then once you've know that you can count the rhythms, know that you've noticed some note patterns and have sort of meaning behind where the notes are going, or just an idea of where the notes are going, then try audiating it, and actually like really hearing it, how it goes. And you've listened to the recording, so that's a great start for the audiation, but then like really hear, got the arpeggio, long notes, and you're hearing the music in your head. And you don't have to sing it out loud. Every time I demonstrate audiation, I always sing, because you can't hear what's happening in my head unless I get it out of my head somehow. But you don't have to sing when you're audiating. In fact, it's probably better to not sing, because when you sing, it brings up all the issues of your singing capabilities, which we aren't really concerned about. We want to hear a clarinet sound in our head, the most beautiful clarinet sound, and really, really hear the music. Cool. Any questions about audiation or the homework for this time? Yeah, let's start with Linda.
I just wanted to check where we'd be able to find recordings, because quite often these things, there aren't that many recordings of them.
Yeah. So it depends definitely what you're working with recordings wise. But this one, there's tons of recordings. Just search YouTube for Rose 32 #1, and you'll find many recordings, which is part of why I picked this piece too. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. When you can't find recordings, that's when you got to work on the audiation. I think Steve, I saw his hand next. Go for it, Steve.
When you get to the sort of the theory part of it, I find that it could easily get bogged down in the theory. In other words, there's only so much theory you need to at least start doing it where your ear could pick it up. For example, like I sometimes just will break it down into there's arpeggio sections and scalar sections, and that once you know that that's coming, you could sort of adjust, and it's easy because one means jumps and the other is equal. But when you start getting into okay, this is a C minor chord with doing that, for me at least, my brain starts to concentrate on that, and it screws up my motor capabilities to play it.
Yeah, totally.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very intentional that I said, look for note patterns in your own words rather than go rewatch all like 6 theory sessions and do a Roman numeral analysis and like Schenkerian chart of the thing. It's all like very personal for what's going to work for you. I agree generally though, like I'm not, maybe occasionally the word neighbor tone will like pass my mind while I'm playing something. But for the most part, I'm like, oh yeah, like half steps leading up kind of thing, or like, yeah, arpeggio scale. Sometimes there's like an interesting one, like in the Rose in measure 8, there's an E minor arpeggio. And that's one, yeah, it's measure 8. That's one where I sort of hit this and I'm like, oh yeah, low E, and then it's an E minor arpeggio. So occasionally I'll like label it specifically, but a lot of times not. For example, in measure 7, I am definitely not thinking, what is this one even? Oh yeah, it starts E minor and then it's B dominant 7. Like I'm definitely not thinking like B dominant. I'm thinking like, oh, this is the one that has the sharps. And maybe subconsciously there's a little sense of like dominant because it's sharps, but I'm not like thinking, B dominant 7th, second inversion. Like that's definitely not.
Then you get an interesting one on 11 where it's kind of like it's a bass note. It's a not an organ tone, a pedal
Yeah.
with a sort of kind of a scale going down at the same time. It's just broken up. If it was on a violin, it would be played as a double stop type of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And again, here I'm not thinking pedal tone. I'm just thinking like, oh yeah, it goes back to G and there's a scale. And it's not like, yeah, I don't even got a good scale off the top of my head. D minor. Yeah, probably D minor because it resolves on a D here. Yeah, so I'm not thinking of what the scale is. It's just sort of, yep, this is going down by step. This is that sort of repeating note down there. Yeah, totally. Good. I think I saw Mitch next. Yep.
Yeah, I'm with you on the noticing patterns, and not at the level that you're doing it, but noticing neighbor tones and things like that could help. What I'm not getting is when I audiate, at this point at least, if I'm just learning, I have to sing one iamda, two iamda in my head. I can't hear a clarinet tone. I'm listening, but I'm listening with the rhythm in mind. And I guess you're getting past that. When you know the rhythm so well, you could just hear a clarinet playing it at the right rhythm. I can't do that.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fine. Like again, it's all a process. And my audiation is probably pretty weak compared to other people who focused on learning this more. But yeah, if you have to count the rhythm, totally fine. That's like a great starting point. And we always want to think about that 1% better every time we do something, right? So if you have to focus on the rhythm really hard at first just to get the rhythm. Then maybe the next time through it, you can do like still counting the rhythm, but like maybe with a little bit more notes in it, where the pitch is kind of changing with the rhythm counting that you have going. And then you can sort of keep stepping stone from there until eventually you're just like hearing the most beautiful clarinet sound with the rhythm. And I think I like the spinning plates analogy that I have, where you have to like be always jumping around to all the different things. So maybe one repetition of audiation, I'm like really locking into the steady beat and thinking about the counting. Maybe on another repetition, I'm like, ooh, how would this sound with like the most beautiful clarinet playing I can imagine? And then maybe on another one, I'm like, what's actually happening with the phrasing? Like, where are the notes leading and things like that? So just like practicing, where we have to sort of jump around and make sure all of the things are going well. Same thing with the audiation.
I guess if you know the rhythm so well, it becomes second nature. Then you could hear a clarinet playing it. And when you're first learning a piece, there's no way I would look at measure 4, 5, 6 without, and just be able to hear it play in the right rhythm without understanding the rhythm first.
Yep, totally. But probably measure 2, you might be able to hear a clarinet playing with the rhythm, right? So that's a good example of just like getting better at rhythm too. For me, measure 4 is familiar enough rhythmically that I can start getting to the clarinet playing sooner. And I have a similar feeling that you probably have in measure 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but even measure 2, I'd still, when I'm starting out, I'd want to make sure I'm holding the notes long enough and keep the pulse and hear it. Maybe even doing this, I could hear it that way.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. Audiating with the metronome is a really good idea, so that you always have that steady beat keeping you honest. Because again, rhythm's the most important part of music. It's so essential to like know how things are fitting into the steady beat. So yeah, that's super.
Yeah, that
super,
answers
super
the question.
important.
Thanks. If you have a metronome there, you can't cheat.
Yeah, exactly. You still have the rhythm going. Jane, did you have a question? I thought I saw you maybe going. Okay, cool. Tish asked about the pattern in measure 24. Yes, so 24. This is a fun one. Anybody have any ideas? Like, how would you describe this in your own words? And maybe type it in the chat if you have an answer really quick, or if anybody wants to sort of like raise their hand and think about it, or maybe Tish, if you have any idea on how to sort of describe that in your own words.
Well, I see intervals, but I don't know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to look at the bottom line separate from the top, but that didn't really help me. So I'm kind of at a loss, but thank you.
Yeah. So you're on the right track with looking at the lines separately, because if we do that, yeah, I don't have a good way to do that. But if we look at just like the top line, C, B, A flat, G, F, that's kind of a scale, right? If we look at just the bottom line, E, D, C, is it a B flat? No, B natural, A, G, also a scale. That one's actually more recognizable as a scale even than the top one. So I think that's the simple way I would explain it, is like it's jumping between 2 scales. We have the top upper notes are doing a scale, the bottom notes are doing a scale, and you sort of have that happening. The one problem for me is it's really hard to think that way when I'm actually playing. Thinking about having 2 scales going at once doesn't work super well for me. I think as a general rule, anytime you're trying to think of 2 things happening at once independently, it doesn't work. 100% true for rhythm. It's not your rhythm's going and the steady beat's going and they're independent. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. We have to bring things together. Just like I always talk about on piano, it's not the right hand's doing its own thing and the left hand's doing its own thing. No, you have to know how they relate to each other, and both hands are doing a thing, doing one overlapping thing, even when it's very complicatedly different, but they always come together somehow. So what I personally like to think about in practice, yes, I know it's sort of these 2 different scales, but I just think about the upbeats. Dim, ba dim, ba dim, ba dim, ba dim, bi so it sort of has that directionality to it, and works together. Does that help? Yeah, Good. Um,
You could
and
you could also think of it as just going down. If you were at a piano, it's going down. It's sixths descending,
Mhm.
so it would be like a chord at the same time. But you can't do that on the clarinet. So it's they do that a lot in popular music. And so
Mhm.
that's another way to look at it, I think.
Yes, definitely. The and the descending sixth, like you're exactly right, except for this one's a minor seventh, but that's like that weird A flat that's not following the pattern. The other way to look at it is also ascending fifths, except for the A flat that throws off the pattern. But you get the idea that that's exactly right. Personally, I when I actually first looked at this, like the probably first several times that I played this etude, I did see it as a descending thing, beat-um, 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 beat-um on the beat. But that's actually harder for me to play. When I switched to thinking about the ascending one, it actually works a ton better as the upbeat leading to the downbeat. But yeah, both are valid patterns. And that's a perfect example of how I said find as many patterns as you can too. Because sometimes thinking about a slightly different pattern makes things click so much better. Leaping all over the place is one pattern that's really not helpful. These two descending scales is another pattern that's a little bit more helpful. Maybe the descending pairs is another pattern that's more helpful. And then for me personally, the most helpful is ascending pairs with the upbeats leading to the downbeats. Yeah, good. There were some other things in the chat after Tisha's question that apparently went away from me because of it crashing. So if that was a question, feel free to put it in again or raise your hand. But Ron also says sometimes fingering the notes is helpful to audiate. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of validity to that practice. The one like trap with that is sometimes when you're having to finger along, you're having to spend a lot of bandwidth just sort of figuring out the fingerings, which is taking away bandwidth from like really hearing how the music goes. It's like it's a way that the clarinet is actually helping you figure out how the music goes, but it's also bringing the problems of the clarinet into your figuring out of how the music goes. Does that make sense? Yeah, but it is a good strategy. I do that a lot too. And especially if you're a more advanced player and like the fingerings come really naturally, that can actually be helpful. Like if I finger from A to C, like I can sort of hear that interval a little bit more by fingering it. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Great. Well, hopefully this was helpful. I hope you all are excited to jump into the homework. I'll post that with the replay of this, what that homework actually is. And again, it's not going to take a ton of time. I was hoping to not have quite so much time between this class and the second session of it. In that second session, we're going to actually be doing some of it together and actually playing it. And it's going to be kind of like a guided practice where we work through the actual playing part of it, which is sort of steps 2 through 4 kind of are what the second session is going to be about. And it'll have some step 5 in there as well, actually. And then we'll go a lot deeper with the actually playing part. But this one's all about like, how does the music go? Really getting that step 1, because like Teresa said, I think that's one of the weaker things that we just like aren't super well practiced on. So I want to make sure we really, really get into that. Jane, you had a question on bar 17?
Yeah, sorry, I only realised I had it as you flicked away from the music. I saw in bar 17 that you have a 3 under the ACE, indicating that to me that would be a triplet, but it doesn't look like a triplet when I count everything up.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that A is actually just an 8th note.
And then, yeah, how are you actually counting it? Like if you're writing
I can't do 1 eander, 2 eander, and all that sort of stuff. So I just go da 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 or da 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 da. So here it would be let me think. It's that first, the ACE is half a note, so to speak. It's a eighth. It's an eighth altogether.
Yeah.
When you count it up, it's an eighth, and so the next three can't be a triplet.
Gotcha. Yep. So this can't all fit within an eighth note because this very first note of it is a dotted eighth note, which is longer than an eighth note, right? The other thing to look for is the break in the beaming. So this, this is all 1/4 note, and then since there's the break in the beaming,
sorry, that's what I meant. I get them mixed up. But
oh, I see.
If that's what 1/4 note, yeah, no, can't be.
It's because or what?
You're right. No, but if it's, let me think. So I have been playing it right, because then I suddenly sat there and I thought, no, hang on a second, that's wrong. And it doesn't actually have a 3 under it in my notes. And so I started thinking, no, damn, it's not a triplet. And so I started trying to work it out and got completely confused. So when I saw that you have a 3 under there, I started thinking, start again.
Yep. This is a classic problem. I actually use this example to teach this problem a lot with my students, where the rose etudes do not mark things well. If you try to figure this out as eighth notes, then you have an extra eighth note in the measure. So that's how you know it's triplets if the 3 is not there. Luckily in this version, I think this comes from Michelle's mastering music thing. This does have the 3 to make it a triplet. So it's 1 and a 2 triplet, 3, 4 and a 1.
Now I can, that's how I was playing it. Da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden I discovered there wasn't a 3 under it, and I thought, hang on, I've been counting it wrong. I kept. I mean, I've played this twice, so this is exaggerating. So I think you get the picture.
Yep. But that's great. And that's the benefit of like really knowing how the music goes, is you can find all of these little things and know if you're doing it right or not. Whereas if you're just sort of throwing the clarinet at it, you may have never like even realized that that's a confusing measure. Yeah. Steve, did you have a comment about that?
Actually, not about that, although that is, you always have to look when you see what look like 3 eighth notes in the thing. You always have to look quickly. I mean, that's where sight reading. If you don't have it, you got to know it's coming. Yeah. Otherwise, you'll do it wrong. But you can. It depends on the publisher how they or the the autograph. But I was just really quick. I mean, are you done with it? Is it something separate?
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine.
This is a book that I like. That of the Rose etudes is. It's edited by Larry Guy, who's like a New York teacher who's published a lot of stuff. Oops, I don't know if it shows. This one. That one has done for you, if you don't have time or if you're just learning. It has a lot of the same stuff that you're saying, but you have to think of. You may not always agree with some of it, but it'll tell you that, and okay, now it's going up in thirds, and it'll give you a suggestion of what to do. Yeah, you got it. And it's really good because most of the Rose etudes just throw the etudes at you, and you have to figure out yourself. And if you haven't done that or haven't done it for a while, you may be a little cautious. But this at least gives you a start that you can go for. So I really like that version of the book, which is it's in print.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot too. And that's kind of helpful for that first step of like figuring out how the music goes, is it gives you like all the like tricks and traps, or at least some of them. Another great resource for learning the Rose etudes, they're probably one of the first ones that come up when you just search Rose 32 number 1, is the series by Claire Grelier. She's French, so I'll put it what I think the spelling is in the chat for her last name. But she has a great series where she's gone through all 32 etudes and talks a little bit about it and then plays it. There's a lot of interpretational things that I do very differently from her when I play them, but that's kind of also inherent in these pieces because they've been done so many times. And that's why it's also beneficial to listen to different recordings of it as well. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Or thoughts? Or things to add? Great. So really seriously do the homework. Like I said, you may think that this is a good idea, but you may not do it. Like schedule it into your practice time. Commit to actually audiating for this next like week and a half until the next session, which is when we'll actually put it onto the clarinet. I know it's tempting to like start playing it on the clarinet like you always do, but let's really build those new muscles of audiation. If you need to play a note here and there to like get an ear for how it's going, totally fine, but like really build that audiation muscle and figure out how the music goes. And I'm hoping that we'll find when we start putting it on the clarinet next time, that by having that clear idea of how the music goes, it's going to make it so much easier to learn it and learn it really well and more efficiently when we get there. So good luck with that. Feel free to comment on the post once I upload the replay with any questions you have about the homework. So let's go ahead and unmute and sign off, and I'll see you all next time. And good luck with your ideation. Bye.
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 Can you see now why I really wanted to get this out to as many people as possible? I hope you were taking notes and really getting into it, because like I said, that's some of my very best stuff. And I know I said this several times in the presentation. It seems so simple and so obvious, but this is the stuff that the people who do it and do it consistently are going to be successful. The people who don't follow that process or sort of meander along aren't going to find that success nearly as fast. So take those notes, review anything you need to, and actually implement it. And most importantly, if you want more of a behind the scenes look at other kinds of trainings that are going to be similar to that we do in the transformation community, and all of the other crazy cool things that we do in the transformation community, then click the link below to register for the 3 live events that Michelle's going to be having open to the public, so everybody can get a little taste and sneak peek of that absolutely wonderful transformation community. So click the link in the comments. Thanks so much for watching this. If you're still watching this far into it, I hope you got lots and lots of value out of it. I look forward to seeing you in another video.